controllers from the other side.
Ladies and gentlemen, I see that the people who already had their coffee are back, and those who are still having it are coming, so we can start the panel. It is a great pleasure for me to have in the panel the three outstanding members of the international academic community. In addition to what has been said with the introduction of our panel members, I would like to add that Professor Hippler was the rector of the University of Karlsruhe. Professor Tarrach was, he already said about his past in the world of governance and academic institutions. And Professor Wiesław Banyś used to be in the past the rector of the University of Silesia in Katowice in Poland. So we have an excellent choice of the participants representing different models of the higher education systems, different models of the universities, different profiles and different governance system. They also are very experienced with all the issues related to the university organization and university structure. Well, I would like to start with the question that has been mentioned during the presentations this morning, and they are related to the diversity and the existence of the different type of the universities and higher education institutions. So is this, I would say, I would be happy to know your opinions on is having this diversity valuable or not? And if yes, then why? If not, also why? The second question would be, does this diversity need to be controlled by the public authorities, or is it something that should come bottom up from inside the universities? And the third sub-question in this topic is, do we need a single act on the higher education, or the different types of the higher education institutions should be governed by the different legal acts and different higher education bills? Well, I would like first to start from Professor Hippler, who has the special knowledge on all these issues, because he comes from the Germany, where the higher education system is not the system for the whole country, but it is differently arranged in different federal states of Germany. So we can start from the most rich model we can ever conceive for a single country. Professor Hippler.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here and giving you some opinions of the diversity we have in the German systems. You know, we have 16 different Länder in Germany. Therefore, we have 16 different university regulations in Germany, which makes the situation, of course, very diverse. And we have different kinds of universities. We have universities of cooperative educations. We have, which are something like dual schools. We have the so-called Fachhochschule, Universities of Applied Sciences, and then we have universities which can provide a PhD thesis. And within this, we have, of course, a great diversity, depending also on the tradition of the university, and also on the area where they are in. And we have, of course, internationally very, very active and respective universities, and we have universities which are very locally very, very important and bound in there. And this diversity we have in Germany, I think, is a richness. And this richness leads to something which I think is very, very important. This is the distributed excellence within Germany. This means the excellence is not just concentrated on one places and at the big universities, big cities like Berlin, Munich, or Hamburg. It's also distributed over the country at smaller universities. However, the excellence there, or let's say the high quality of research and science, is then in just a restricted field, a restricted area, which then becomes the strategic, let's say, goal and development of this kind of university, which I think is of a great richness in Germany, so that we don't have isolated points which are of high excellence and others there's nothing. And therefore, I think this system is very, very well now understood in Germany. However, this does not lead to high rankings at the Times Higher Education or QS rankings, and therefore there we need a little bit more self-confidence in order to say our system should not be compared with the Anglo-Saxon system, and this system is anyway very, very good, and we see the success of the German economic system, which is reflected from the academic education. So this is diversity is a richness. Diversity should not always be regulated by a law. Diversity should be developed by competition between the institutions, and I think this is the most important part. And we do not need special regulations for special schools or for special universities. In a university law, one should regulate as little as possible, and most of them just should be regulated by the universities, institutions themselves. Let me just add one sentence which came in mind when the Vice Prime Minister was talking about this new law, and he saw this which should be a law which will hold for a long time. If you want to have a law which holds for a long time, the point is that you do not foresee the developments. And we have in some countries, in some states in Germany, we have an experimental clause in the laws, which then allows the university to develop in a different way, which is not regulated by the law, and it takes then this experimental clause. And this means if you want to change the internal structure of the university, which is not in the common understanding of the university as it is now, you can do this by using this experimental clause in the regulation, which I think is very, very important to have an openness and a further development which cannot be foreseen by law which you are creating right now.
Thank you very much, Professor Hippler. So the variety is the virtue. Managing this variety should not be restricted to public authorities, and the general law is better, especially with this experimental clause, is better than the detailed regulations.
Exactly.
Well, Professor Tarrach, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I will be very short because I would have said more or less the same. You know, that's the problem when you put together three people. We meet at the meetings of the Council of the European University Association, and I don't know if through discussions eventually we have a little bit the same mindset. Anyhow, the diversity to me is evident because society is so diverse. And in different places you have different needs, and you might have a university which wants to concentrate on fundamental research, another one on applied research, another one on development, another one on quality of teaching, another one on serving students, and another one in outreach activity, explaining to society the beauty of the black hole which is in the center of our universe. So you have very many different things you can do, and one university cannot do all these things. So it should be the university, through their governance structure, which decides what to do. I like to give an example, which I contrived myself an old time ago. You know, there might be universities who take students whose level of knowledge is 50 and take them to 100 when they leave the university. And other universities who are very selective, when the students enter, their level of knowledge is 95 and take them to 105. Now, these are two very different models, and we can now discuss what is better. And in fact, in the Times Higher Education ranking, they only look at the final thing. So since 105 is larger than 100, the one which takes from 95 to 105 will be considered a good university, and the one which went from 50 to 100, which maybe even is better, would be considered not so good. So this diversity, if we accept this diversity, there is a role to play for all of the universities, and I think that's very good. And your two other remarks, questions, who decides? I think the university. And do you need different acts, different legal frames for these different profiles? No. Now, I think the law, I always insist with politicians in charge of laws, they always insist, write the law. It should be short. It should give the university all the freedom to do good work or to mess it up. If you have the freedom, you might get it wrong. But give them this freedom, and most of them will do an excellent job. So one single law which is flexible so that the universities can adapt to changing circumstances, that's what I would recommend. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Professor Banyś, view from the Polish perspective and with the knowledge of Polish circumstances.
In fact, both European perspective and Polish perspective, and I'd say, in fact, more or less the same things as Rolf and Hippler concerning this general perspective of the diversity of higher education institutions. But I would like to highlight 3 points, at least 3 points, that are important, I think, in the European perspective and Polish perspective both. First thing, in fact, this issue of institutional diversity has become more pressing in the framework of international competition, which raises its own diversity-related question. Given the high costs of internationally competitive research, the question is often associated with the systemic conditions needed to allow for the emergence of a few internationally oriented research-intensive universities. The high expenditures needed to sustain such universities demand some concentration of resources. But, and this is a very important point and a hot debate in Poland, at the same time, however, policymakers, rectors, and in general institutional representatives raise the concern that other dimensions of higher education must be attended to urgently, such as the need to educate and train qualified and adapted workers in an ever more diverse range of areas and to develop continuously the skills and the knowledge of already qualified workers, or the need for higher education and research to fuel the innovative capacity of business. Second point, we should also point to the key distinction between external diversity as the differences between institutions and internal diversity as the differences which can be found within a given institution. In particular, in recent policy debates in Poland, also in the context of the preparation of the new law on universities, great attention has been paid to the role and conditions of particular types of institutions, mentioned, for instance, by Professor Kwiek and his team, such as the internationally oriented research university and the systemic conditions in which they may succeed, the idea of a teaching-only university or higher education institution. And the question is, it's necessary, useful, or maybe not well thought. The future of vocationally oriented higher education institutions and the conditions needed to sustain their separate profiles, for instance, through dual sector definitions or other mechanisms, and also emerging new or redefined types of institutions, such as regionally engaged higher education institutions. And diverse needs could be addressed in a horizontally differentiated landscape of institutions with divergent mission mixes, institutional types of profiles, which would benefit from some parity of esteem, rather than be seen as part of an institutional hierarchy. In this context, one should add that it's not entirely self-evident that the diverse societal expectations would have to be met by a wide variety of different types of institutions that should be relatively coherent internally and homogeneous in their missions, as it is so often assumed. One could just as well imagine a diverse higher education system in which the diversity of needs is met by diverse institutional responses, which vary more within than between institutions, as, for instance, in the case of communautés d'universités d'établissement in France, or French federal universities, or federations of universities. The idea we are in the middle of discussing in Poland too. Mr. Vice Prime Minister mentioned it in his inaugural speech. Given the fact that so many higher education institutions are often constructs that have been created from the agglomeration or mergers of different faculties, institutes, or even institutions with different histories and institutional identities, for instance, in the case of this French press pôle de recherche et d'enseignement supérieur, or communauté d'établissement et d'université, one may ask what exactly the external boundaries of higher education institutions are. In light of the proliferation of mergers, poles of excellence, joint provision, and a whole range of cooperative forms and provisions, the idea of institutional identity may deserve to be looked at afresh with multiple and softer boundaries than commonly assumed. This, in turn, may shed new light on how to meet the challenges of diversity. One may ask also why a high degree of external diversity in a higher education system would be a better representation of the responsiveness of a higher education system than the sum of institutions with a high degree of internal diversity. For instance, French Federal University, and I hope also Polish Federal University. And third point, diversity of institutional profiles may be pursued through processes of vertical or horizontal differentiation. The latter, horizontal differentiation, would seek to create parity of esteem between different types of profiles, whereas the former, vertical differentiation, would prefer and prioritize some types more highly than others, or define them through differences of quality standards. While vertical differentiation implies a hierarchy of values attributed to different higher education functions, supporting a redefined form of elite in the context of a massified higher education system, horizontal differentiation would call for a more equal investment in the different functions. And it's a very important point for us when we are discussing our budget and the repartition of the budget among our institutions. Horizontal differentiation approaches require a set of incentives to be effective, which implies an increase in funding to support the expanded function, as well as the traditional functions, which are still needed as they were before. Vertical differentiation is more often chosen when limited funds force policymakers to concentrate expenditure on those functions and institutions from which they expect the highest value added. Vertical differentiation forces have grown in recent years and have been more strongly determined by research performance and international visibility. But I like very much the idea of German Rectors Conference of distributed excellence and what we are calling here in Poland as excellence networks, because we cannot forget that in fact we are very diverse landscape of our higher education institutions, and we have to care of every element of this landscape. But I like to say that, in fact, at the question posed and asked by Marcin, I would like to say that, in fact, we need more diversity, more flexibility, more autonomy, and more money. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that that was also mentioned in the lecture of Professor Tarrach, the things that all the rectors could agree upon. But autonomy, more autonomy, but it has been said many times during this morning that autonomy doesn't go without responsibility. And the more autonomy, the more responsibility. So I would like to ask the question, what is who in your opinion should judge whether the university works well or not? Who should say if the autonomy is used well, or if not, who should send the signal that something should be changed? Maybe we can start now from this side.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the central questions of autonomy when it comes, as it should, with responsibility. I mean, who judges that? Now, one of the things a university should do at some point, every now and then, maybe every 15 years, is to develop a strategy, a goal, long-term goals. What do we want to do? Where do we want to be in 15 years? And that depends very much on the countries. There are countries where then the universities sign multi-year plans. They usually are 3 or 4 year plans with the government, where they become more concrete and they say, this is what we want to do, this is what we want to achieve in the next 4 years. And that is, by the way, the instrument by which the government can somehow also play a role, as the government should play a role. Because that is a negotiation between what the university proposes and what the government says is ready to finance. Because it is essential to have a funding which is long-term, over 4 years, more or less, so that the university knows for the next 4 years, if I do this and that, and the government agrees, then it will get the funding. Now, these 4 year plans, at the end, have to come with an evaluation. At the end, there is an evaluation, which is usually the best way of doing this is an external body. You can come to our association, the European University Association. We propose you a board of 5 former rectors, usually. And they come, they have a look, they see what you have been realizing, and then they write a report. And that report, the university can contest. They can, say, well, that's not exactly as it is. And that report goes to the government. And then the government, of course, might be happy or not. And the consequences come then for the next 4 year plan. Because if they are not happy, they will tell you, look, we are not going to give you so much money. Or you have to do things differently. So it is a combination of having an external evaluation. It is essential that it is an external evaluation, and there are enough people who are able to do these evaluations. I would not recommend to look at the rankings. Because the rankings look at very specific things, but certainly not in all the different ways in which we can serve society. But as I say, the essential points to me is a long-term strategy, 4 year plans which are agreed upon with the government, and then an evaluation of what is done every 4 years.
Thank you very much. That's the clear answer. Professor Hippler.
Yes, I see it a little bit different. Because I think, of course, since the money comes from the taxpayers via the government, there is a responsibility to justify what the university has done. And the question, however, is how to do this. Of course, there's the option of steering with some, let's say, financial help coming from the government. But I think the basic funding of a university should be guaranteed anyway before. And then one could talk about extra tasks and extra things. However, I think it would be much, much better if the Board of Trustees is negotiating with the university how to proceed, and that the Board of Trustees, which represents more the society than the policy of the country, looks whether the university has fulfilled its obligation towards society. And therefore, I think every university should have a Board of Trustees, and I mean trustees. These are people you trust, and people they trust also the university. And they have no personal interest in the forthcoming. And this may be mostly external people coming there from society, maybe representatives of all different kinds of things. And with these, one has to develop whether a university is just going on and serving society or not. And this is true in all the directions. This means for teaching, of course, for research, and of course, for innovation. And I think universities have to play an important part also into innovation. And one should also think of that innovation is not just starting up new companies, having better products. Innovation is also something which goes via the brains of the of the people who are leaving the university, and so universities have a much, much higher influence into the development of the society via the developing of the personalities of their students, because when they leave the university, they are obliged to just further on support society and develop society, and this has to go together. So this is, for me, a much more important part of a university education than just training for a job.
Professor Hippler, do you think that then the opinion from the alumni should be also an important part of the evaluation of whether the university works well or not? Professor Hippler.
Alumni are very heterogeneous, and the question is whether this is general, but if you take some alumni into the Board of Trustees, I would think this would be just great, because they have experienced the university and they have experienced their life in society, and they know what are the demands also for the future. And I think this interaction between alumni in the Board of Trustees is very, very important, but very general. Because you're an alumni, you do not have the right just to judge a university. This has to be done within the board.
Okay. Professor Banyś.
Naturally, the question of the autonomy is one of the crucial questions of the functioning of universities. And it has been mentioned by Mr. Vice Prime Minister, by the President Tarrach, and also by the President Horst Hippler and you, Marcin. And naturally, everybody agrees, in fact, that it's a very important question. But naturally, it's not important because, as in some commentaries appeared, something like the autonomy is important because it is written in our constitution. No, the question is why it has been written and put down in our constitution. And we know exactly the reasons for this mention in our constitution, because we have left, fortunately, the totalitarian system of a communist party. And from this point of view, we have recovered our liberty, our freedom. And this mention in our constitution of the autonomy of universities is absolutely important thing. And I think also that now we are discussing about the marges of the autonomy, and I'm very glad and happy that Mr. Vice Prime Minister said that in fact there is no attempt to limit in any kind of our autonomy. It's a very important thing. But why it's very important? It's very important because naturally we have to manage, in fact, our research and teaching activities. We and not another instance of some governmental or regional body. But if I had to say in one word what is the autonomy for the university, I'd like with pleasure repeat the word of Jaspers mentioned by Mr. Vice Prime Minister, because in fact the universities are really and truly our intellectual conscience. What does it mean? It means many, many things, in fact, but also the question of be free to say sometimes at least the truth that it's not maybe appropriate to some ears, and in particular of our politicians. But I think that it's also important, our autonomy, from the point of view of our taxpayers, as Horst mentioned some minutes ago. And if someone asks me if universities have to be accountable in front of the government, or in due all respects, Mr. Vice Prime Minister, in front of the ministry, I'd like to say no, because we are responsible for our activities in front of the society. What does it mean? It means, in fact, that we can have some boards of trustees, as Horst mentioned, because it's not the society, it's not the government, it's not the ministry, it's we all, the society. And the representatives of this society can be chosen as a board of trustees, as the name trustees means. They have our trust, and they trust us. And naturally, we have to do together the best things for our society, not for an instance of government or ministry or something else, for us. From this point of view, it's interesting to take as point of reference our European University Association Autonomy Scoreboard mentioned by Rolf Tarrach some minutes ago, because it's a very good example of the comparison where we are in Poland with the autonomy. And if we have to shape our new law on universities, I think that we have to merge two systems. The British, in fact, the English system of the autonomy, and if you look at this autonomy scoreboard, the English system has everywhere, in every point, in every parameter, 100%. For instance, concerning the selection of the executive head is not validated by an external authority. It's exactly the case of the English system. The selection criteria for the executive head are not stated in the law. This is the university that chooses what it wants to have, and so on and so on. From this point of view, this autonomy of English universities and the situation mentioned by Mr. Vice Prime Minister of their activities and also the position in rankings means that this autonomy plays its role. But naturally, we can to compare with this English system the Swiss system, which is different. But they have also our Swiss French, our Swiss friends. They have also a very good atu. in particular, they have money. Composing these two things, autonomy and money, and board of trustees, it will be a very good thing for us in Poland.
Yeah, sure.
Let me add something, because I think there might be a slight disagreement here. I mean, I said that I think that after 4 years or whatever, there should be an external evaluation of what the university does, and that includes an evaluation of the board of trustees. And you two have not mentioned that. You have said that the board of trustees, they are like God and they do everything.
You're right. Yeah,
so
you're
I
right.
think that external evaluation, including the board of trustees, that should be sent to the government, because eventually they give the money. Okay.
Okay,
So,
it's an
I
important.
just wanted
I think
to
it's
say that there might be
important
something-
element that the board of trustees, or whatever we call it, is not free of responsibility.
Of course.
That is my point.
Professor Hippler.
Maybe just if you talk about autonomy, there are two kinds of control. One kind of a control of a university is the control of the legality, and this, of course, has to be in the hands of the minister or the ministry. There's no doubt about this. However, if it goes then on to supervisory control, this is different. And I think there, a too strong control of a minister would just perturb the development of a university. And this should be done more by the Board of Trustees together with the president or rector, of course, and then trying to just justify the accountability and whatever is done. But the micro steering of a university is not part of a ministry and not part of a really progressive and a new law which you are going to develop, because otherwise you would not allow diversity to develop, you would not allow competition to develop, and you would not allow that you have a different kind of, let's say, strategies to develop, and maybe also different kind of university structures, which I thought at the very beginning would be very, very helpful if you have in your law an experimental clause which would allow these kind of things. Of course, this has to be discussed then with the legislative, whether this is opportune or not, but to be open for new things without being necessary to change the law all the time on the development, because I think this is very, very important, because the future is something which is very difficult to be foreseen.
Thank you. I would like to take you up now on another part of the story, not the relation between the outer world, but the internal working of the universities. Higher education institutions are very often quite large and complex organisms, so they have to have the internal structure. And to what extent this internal structure, is it reasonable to define it by the general law? To what extent in internal university statutes? And what should be in particular the relation between the centralized powers in the university, like rector, senate, board, as we discuss it now, and the lower level, first of all, the collegial bodies, like, for example, the faculty board, the deans, etc. How do you see this kind of interplay and the division of powers, responsibilities, and rights in the internal university working? Maybe Professor Hippler.
I think there's, of course, this classical approach everybody knows from you, and we do not have to just discuss this. But one has to look on the current development. So in the past, of course, faculties or departments is a little bit different than faculties. They have been responsible, of course, for research and for teaching. And but now research is going over many boundaries and many areas together. So that I think it would be a bad idea to just have the control of research in the hand of faculties, because then you would not be able to allow for fast changes, quick changes, and new views and new opportunities. So therefore, there should be a difference between, let's say, the responsibility for teaching, because you need some basic teaching, in particular in the bachelor's program, coming from the different areas, different fields. But if you go to master programs, that's already a little bit more different, because this goes closer to research and to the research developments, and then might think about different structures. So what we are discussing in Germany now is some kind of a matrix structure, where the older kind of faculties are more responsible for the basic teaching and the teaching in their fields, and that for research you need a different structure which tackles the challenges. So if you have a challenge talking about mobility, then you need experiences from different kind of fields, from economics, of course, from laws, of course, from engineering, of course, and also from natural sciences. The same is true if you look for sustainable energy, and if you look for health in the future. Health is something which is now touched by almost every field, and not to forget social sciences and humanities. So the disciplines are, in many cases in research, have to merge together, and this is not in the hands of a unique faculty. So one has to think about organizing research in a different way than one organizes teaching, and these kind of things. For this, you need this experimental clause in the law that you are able to adapt your structure to the demands, how they are changing very, very quickly. And on the other hand, also, if you are internally, a university in general is not very, very quick in the decisions. However, it might be very important that you have an option to hire a very, very good young individual which just fits into the development of your structure. And however, if you go through all the procedures, which may take 1 or 2 years, this person is gone somewhere else, and you have just missed this opportunity. Therefore, I think it's very, very important that you have a strategic body within the university with a strategic budget located at the rector or president to just be able to have fast decisions in order to be competitive.
Professor Banyś, what's your view?
I'm very keen to protect and to maintain the diversity, the flexibility, and the autonomy. And from this point of view, I heard with pleasure the words of our minister, Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Gowin, that in fact the law will be very general, and the internal structure of universities will be decided by university. And in fact, more dispositions will be transferred to the statutes of universities and less regulations in the law. From this point of view, I think that there are many different configurations and possibilities to create internal structure of universities. It may be something like, in Poland at least, a faculty-based structure, if it is judged okay by all of us. It may be some mix of a new type like collegia, British or English style, for instance, and maybe a mix of everything. What is the most important for me, it's the goal that we have to reach. And if our structure is the structure that allows us to meet our goals and to reach what we would to reach, it's okay. It's not to the law to determine what is the structure of everything. And from this point of view, the question of interdisciplinary studies and teaching, Horst mentioned it some seconds ago, it's something that it's absolutely flexible, and it's absolutely up to the university to do this kind of things. If we don't do these interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary teaching or research, it's in fact our fault, and we have to fix it.
Professor Tarrach.
Yeah, so about the internal structure, I think that the university should define its priorities, and the structures should adapt to the priorities and not the other way around. I remember when I started as president of the University of Luxembourg, I defined 5 priorities. I convinced my board of trustees that these were good priorities. 2 of them were just incompatible with the faculty structure. I mean, one of them was systems biomedicine, and the other one was security, reliability, and trust. And both of them, in systems biomedicine, 50% of the researchers come not from life sciences. I mean, they are not medical doctors, they are not biologists, they are informaticians, they are computer scientists, they are mathematicians, they are physicists, they are engineers. So that you can't do anything with the faculties there. In the other one, in security, reliability, and trust, there are very many legal issues, which again went beyond computer sciences and expertise and security. So I think it is first the priorities and then the structures. And that means that the law should only mention the kind of structures you can have, and then the university should decide how it uses it. Now, I would like to finish with a remark which Professor Hippler made, and which I think is essential, again, for the government to see that the university has the possibility to hire top people in a very quickly and efficiently, because the top people, you usually can't get them if you go through the standard procedure, which very often takes, depending on the country, 1 year, 1.5 years, and so on. Luckily, again, in our case, I could do that, and that was, in fact, the best people. We hired them through this non-normal procedure, and it is essential that the universities have this. If they get it wrong, they are going to bear the consequences, and they will have to explain how they got it wrong. But they have the possibility, because these top people, if you have a window of opportunity of getting them, that window closes, and if you tell them, it takes them 1.5 years to make you an offer, then of course either they are not top people, or or they are gone somewhere else.
So to summarize, Professor Hippler says about the matrix structure and the priority for efficient taking the decisions once the excellence is concerned. Professor Banyś, could be your statement could be summarized: think yourself and then find what serves the goal best, and don't forget interdisciplinarity. That's also what Professor Hippler mentioned. And Professor Tarrach, priorities first, structures then.
Yes.
And okay, that's also a quite clear points of view. In the last 10 minutes of our panel, I would like to ask you for something that is related to your personal experience as rectors. And maybe each of you could say in just 2 minutes, should rector be a kind of a manager or a leader? And what are the consequences? Professor Banyś.
Yeah, I think that this alternative is not a good one. I think that a good rector should be a leader, a visionary, something that who leads naturally the university, and who has a vision of the development of the university and the cooperation with partners outside the university. But naturally, a good rector should be also a good manager. But I think that if he's a good leader, he can always hire some people who are very competent and skilly in the management. But I think if I have to choose a leader or manager, I'd say a leader naturally, because it's for us, in fact, rectors, to lead our universities.
Thank you. Professor Hippler.
This brings me back to the question on how to select a rector or a president. And this
That
means,
was the reason for the question.
yes, and this means if you're just thinking it's very good just to have a good manager, then the university might probably fail, because managing is just one thing, but you have to be also accepted by the professors of the institutions. And if you're not accepted internally and you just have no, let's say, high regard in the scientific community, then nobody believes you're managing procedures anyway. So this is a problem, and therefore a rector needs, or at least, although he may be selected by committee from external and from people from the board of trustees and from the Senate together, but he needs a strong support from the internal part of the university, so a strong support from the Senate at least, in order to show that he is accepted by the scientific community of the institution. And therefore, it's very obvious that the person should have both qualifications at the same time. And I think both are important, but I think the leading qualification in science is even more important than the managing quality, because the managing quality can be learned and can be supported by other people. However, the acceptance in the scientific community, if you don't have it before, you will never have it and never gain it as a rector.
Okay, thank you. Professor Tarrach.
Yeah, so as you said that you would like us to use our personal experience, I tell you my personal experience. I got, in the summer of 2004, a call from an English headhunter. Now he asked me, would you like to be president of a new university in Luxembourg? I said, well, I hardly know where Luxembourg is. He said, well, you will learn that. And anyhow, so eventually I started half a year later in Luxembourg, and there had been a first rector appointed, and he died. After 2 months on the job, he died. He came from Canada, so he died. So the board of trustees of the university got used to manage the university. So I came, and after 3 months, we had a real conflict. I said, look, I mean, you have gotten used to manage the university, so I don't know what I'm doing here. I think I bring enough experience to know what to do with the university and to define the strategy, and then you decide. But you're doing too much. So, you have to decide. That is your responsibility. If you want me to stay, I need a certain amount of power and leadership, or otherwise, I go. And we agreed that I should lead the university. So that is my answer to that. Now, as I mentioned to you that at that university and very many universities, you have a council, or in many places it's called a senate, but not here, where there are people representing the university. Now it is essential to keep that body to do an effective, a good work. Now one of the problems of these larger bodies is that there is always somebody who likes to talk a lot. So since I had a long experience in Spain as head of the Spanish Research Council, of managing people who like to talk a lot, and not so by this making it very difficult to decide anything, I introduced the rule that we start at 2 o'clock and we finish at 4 o'clock, and therefore, in the discussions, one had 3 minutes. Everybody has 3 minutes. a rule which, of course, I was the chair of the whole thing, but it also I followed the same rule. Now, people got very angry with me, and they went to talk to the minister, and he told them, look, this guy is a dictator, he doesn't allow us to talk. And the minister called me, and I said, look, I mean, they are talking about things which nobody is interested in, and, and the good people, if they see that they're going to waste the whole afternoon, they just don't come. And at the end, I have the people who don't have anything to do. And then the minister said, okay, you go on. And I got the support from the board. So I think, well, leadership also means to do things which not everybody approves and not everybody is happy with. But that is also a role of the governing body or the board of trustees. If they say, okay, you go on this way, then go on this way. So leadership is important, yes.
Okay, thank you. So to summarize, I think that of this part, the leadership is essential, and probably without leadership, there is no way of being a good and effective rector. Having the managerial skills helps a lot, although it's probably better to substitute some managerial skills than the leading skills. So that sets the perspective. Well, we are coming to the end of this panel discussion, and we come approaching the start of the discussion with the questions from the public. So I will just very briefly say that we have discussed about the diversity, about the responsibilities of the university and its interplay with autonomy, about the internal organization of the university, and the traits of a rector or the rector's candidate, with the outreach into how the rectors should be hired and how the rectors should be fired if they are not hired well. I would like to thank you very much for this part, and I would encourage people from the audience to start the questions. I believe that questions could be asked either in Polish or in English. We'll try to answer in English to all the questions. Who wants to? Yes, please. Here in the third row.
Hello, Jacek Karczewski. I'm president of the Alumni Association at the Faculty of Electronics of the Warsaw University of Technology. Now, I would like to touch upon the topic of the Board of Trustees. Now, I see two problems. First of all, you mentioned that the board should be composed of people who have no personal interest. Now, sometimes I think that there might be some skepticism as to working with people who have no personal interest. Some people find it maybe difficult to work with those kinds of people because you cannot influence them as easily as maybe you'd like to. And if you could comment on how to find how to convince people that people with no personal interest are a valuable addition to the management of the university. And second thing is that we've already had some experience with boards of, let's say, advisory boards to the university rectors, etc. And very often they are composed of top-notch politicians, both local and country-level politicians, for whom this is the 50th function that they have. And they are not really interested, it's just another position in their CV. They're not very interested in helping the university, because sometimes they are in the advisory boards of 10 universities. And how to also act in a way so as not to fill this board of trustees with people for whom this is yet another function, which sometimes even they don't care about. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether maybe we can take 3 questions and then answer this. I saw our Vice Prime Minister raising hands, but I don't know whether you were greeting someone or you wanted also to ask the question. Okay. Is there any? Yes, please.
Łukasz Sułkowski, Jagiellonian University and Polish Accreditation Committee. Actually, I have a question to Professor Tarrach. In Poland, we are in a situation of a choice of a rector by a collegial body, just colleagues, senate or academic council, as you name that. And you are showing, let's say, in some way most effective system, a board of trustees or a governing body that is smaller, that has no conflict of interest and is making the choice of the rector. However, let's say in Poland, we have several concerns. This is the matter of the tradition. This is the matter of the low social capital. This is the matter of relatively poor, low representation of the associations of entrepreneurs. This is the question that was raised, how to find really engaged, competent people to governing bodies. So I think that the Polish way will be in some way evolutionary. We will slowly go out from the collegial system. We will go more with a more managerial system. However, we must find the mechanism in the middle. So my question is, could you advise us how to do, not to give the decision that it will be governing body and the choice made by the small group of the rectors, cutting out the academic councils from the decision making about the crucial things that is in Polish tradition, and in some way make the system more effective, change that in a positive way, but let's say not to change too radically, because probably it will be very tough to make such a huge revolution in this moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A third question? Yes, I can see the hands raised there.
Karol Myśliwiec, Polish Academy of Sciences, Institute for Mediterranean and Oriental Studies. I'm very glad that Professor Gowin mentioned at the beginning of the conference that the conference is mainly going to be about freedom. And I took this announcement very seriously. What we are discussing about are structures. Structures, some of them may be good for one university, not good for another university. So demanding the speakers that they give us one model which would be applicable for any university simply cannot be realized. But what I am missing in this discussion is the more philosophical, social, and political aspect of the matter. What I always envied my Western European colleagues, professors at the universities, were not salaries, but the tremendous respect and trust they had on the side of the authorities. I am a member of the Austrian Academy of Sciences also, so I often go to Vienna for the conferences, for the meetings, where you cannot imagine that there is a General Assembly of the Academy of Sciences without the state president who is simply thanking science for its achievement. In Germany, well, scientists are much more free than in Poland in disposing about money, and nobody asks them to give a Quittung for absolutely everything, so something which is killing the Polish science. So I think in Poland, and I believe it's a little bit a continuation of the tradition from the communist times, where the authorities were afraid of the scientists. A scientist was very often presented as a natural enemy of the people. And this attitude was very much supported by some politicians, is still supported by some politicians today, and I think we should work on it to change the general atmosphere around the science, because this is also a very important element of the freedom. And one of the details, I think the suggestion that outstanding Polish scientists working abroad should come to work in Poland. The question is if they want. What kind of questions they would ask if they are invited to. And I'm afraid among the questions they ask would be the salary. And if their salary is at the level of the present situation, they would simply laugh. They would never return. Last year I met in Greece, a Greek scientist representing technical sciences, who took seriously the invitation of the Jagiellonian University to come and work there. And he was, somehow, not prepared for asking a question about his salary. When he came to Krakow, and the end of the conversation was very positive for him, so he asked about the money he would earn, and he simply didn't want to believe. He thought that so there is a mistake concerning the zeros at the end of the sum. So I know that gentlemen do not speak about money, but sometimes it's better not to be a gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's, I believe it was rather a statement than the question, but let's come back to the answers. Who is going to answer first? Professor Banyś. Let's try to keep the answers reasonably long so that there is room for more questions.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I will leave the pleasure to answer the question of governing bodies and bodies of trustees to my friends. But I think that Professor Myśliwiec is absolutely right. But we have discussed the question of money. We have discussed also without details, the question of how to say this intellectual potential and our societal responsiveness of our higher education institutions. I think that everything you said has been, in fact, said by Mr. Vice Prime Minister in the words of Jaspers, intellectual conscience. It's just a container for everything you said. But it's absolutely important that we cannot forget the question of our intellectual heritage of universities and our intellectual also obligations and duties towards society. It's absolutely crucial. And to finish, I would add to my slogan, in fact, that diversity, flexibility, autonomy, intellectual conscience, and money. But we discussing about money, and I hope that Mr. Vice Prime Minister will choose the way to increase our budgets.
Let me then answer the other questions. The question of how to find people with no personal interest when they are in the board of trustees. Of course, this is delicate. And if you choose somebody who has already 49 obligations, forget about him. This is so easy. And these point of people, they have to be found together, of course, with the people from the university, with the first set. I would say the first set is the most important part. The second thing is then if this body has to renovate itself from itself and proposing other people who are responsible, and then they have to take care that they represent, of course, the society. And of course, there are people doing many, many different things. And what we have learned, what is very, very important, that you don't have, let's say, former or present or active politicians in the board. They should be people just representing the society, coming from science, coming from institutions, coming from non-government bodies and these kind of things. And of course, it's always good if you have some kind of an alumnus being part of this. So there's just you cannot prevent this from mistakes, but this is the basic. And the most important thing is then the renovation of this board has to be in agreement. This is one thing. And the second question was, of course, how to find a rector and how to include the internal bodies. That's what I said. I mean, if it's just decided from external how to find a new rector or a president, this may be a problem. You have to have a council which does it together with people from the Board of Trustees or from external, and also with people from the Senate. And then at the end, there should be a mandate of the Senate or of the internal council of the university, a strong mandate, in order that the rector just feels also represented by the university. Otherwise, this will not work. And if you put this together and bind this together, I think then there's an excellent way whether to choose somebody from the outside or from the inside. In the past, I mean, people were saying, we do not need a rector, what we need is something who is just representing and shaking hands for the university. But this is not the future. The future is that you are a leader, develop strategies, and that you are managing the university. And therefore you need a support from the outside, a trust from the trustees, and from the inside. And this has to go together, which is not easy. I tell you, it's really not easy, but it has to go like this. Otherwise, there will be problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will try to quickly answer the three sets of questions. I mean, first, the Technical University of Warsaw, about the no personal interest. I said there shouldn't be a conflict of interest. Now, when there is a conflict of interest, it means that there are two types of interest. Not zero types of interest. There are two. And that is what I said should be avoided. The only interest of a person in a board of trustees should be the quality and the performance of the university. And that person should not have a personal interest because, you know, this person is, I don't know, is a big boss of Vodafone and would like the university to have a contract with Vodafone. That is what I meant. So certainly these people should have an interest and strong interest in doing something for their society, for their university, you know, and so that is the answer. Now about the advisory board, I agree completely with you. My own experience with advisory boards I've had is that it is very unlikely that they are of any use whatsoever. You know, they meet once or a couple of times a year. These are, as you say, people who have, you know, and on their CV they are, I don't know how many advisory boards. It's another thing if you have a concrete project or issue to ask them, and then you create an advisory board to tackle with that. That's a very different thing. But you know, just an advisory board for an institution, and they come a couple of times a year, usually that, my own experience is that doesn't really help you a lot. So the Jagiellonian, yeah, the choice of the rector, and that it is very often difficult to find. I mean, if the rector has to be somehow appointed by the governing structure, and this governing structure has lots of people who are external, it is very often difficult today to find the right people. That is completely true and happens in very many other countries too. Again, I evaluated with 4 colleagues in the year 11 the Spanish university system, and so we spent a year looking through it, and that was one of the problems we discovered. You know, the people there told us we don't find the right people in the society who are ready to put time and energy into developing the university. So what the law should do is to allow for a graduate change, for experimenting. You mentioned it, experimentation. And let me mention that it's not only that in Germany they have a law which allows the universities to try different paths, but also a country like Portugal, which has a more modest academic tradition, thanks to a very strong minister they had. I mean, he passed away. You know, they have a system where the university can decide whether they want to be a foundation, for instance, a charity. And there are 3 universities in Portugal who are charities. So they basically can run the university as they want. They sign an agreement with the government tells them, put some limits, and for the rest, they are like the British university. They are a charity and they go ahead. So I think it is good to have a law which allows all these trying this and trying that, because it's a world, it's a complex world. I mean, you know it. Universities are very complex, much more complex than businesses. I mean, a business, when I talk to business people, you know, that their aim is very simple, you know, make money. If you talk about what are we there for, you know, then you get into huge discussions, you know, education, research, applied research, you know, transmission, you know, influence of society, liberty, you know, philosophical approaches, zillion of things. So it's very complex. The law should be flexible to allow the universities to try different paths. And the Polish Academy, freedom. Now, when I did my PhD, that's a long time ago, I think the number of students was 10%, that was in Spain, 10% of what it is today. And that has happened in very many places. That's to say, the university system, I don't know, 50 years ago, was something, you know, a few people would do, and the government did not care too much about it. And has become now something which is sometimes not too far from 1% of the expenditure of the gross domestic product. So, you know, when you have in your budget something which approaches 1%, you start worrying about it. This is a sea change. It's a huge change. And of course, that huge change has consequences. Academic freedom is essential, but there are more and more limits in some sense. For instance, research money, you usually don't get any more in most of the universities, just research money for doing whatever you would like to do. You know, usually you have agencies, you present a project and then, you know, you're evaluated and you get the money or you don't get the money. Of course, if you do research which doesn't cost anything, then, you know, you can do it maybe on your own, but that is doubtful whether that really works. So there are, because of the changes in society and because of the quantitative changes, there are, of course, limits to our freedom. But nevertheless, in our education, I always tell my colleagues that we should not teach only, I mean, if I teach quantum physics, I taught quantum physics, I'm forgetting it now. You know, I mean, I always added at the end a few minutes where I touched upon another subject. Because we don't have to talk only about our discipline. We also have to contribute to shaping these young people, you know, so that they are responsible of our society. A democracy only works if people are responsible. That's like autonomy. Autonomy comes with responsibility. Democracy comes with responsibility. You know, I remember the changes in Spain after Franco, when Franco died. People thought democracy means that we have all the rights. And I thought, well, you know, all the rights and also lots of obligations, lots of things you have to do. And that is the point. And now the last point about bringing back Poles back to Poland. Yeah, of course, I know. I mean, I know how difficult that is. However, look at examples. I'll give you one example. There is a top Polish colleague of mine working in my old field of quantum information theory, Maciek Levenstein in Barcelona. Well, there are very many reasons why he's there. But I mean, one of the reasons is that he got a contract from an institution which started 10, 15 years ago, which is called ICREA. You can look it up, I-C-R-E-A, ICREA. Now, that institution, what they do is they got money from the Catalan government, in this case, and they look for people, good researchers, top researchers. They give them a contract. They give them a good salary. It's not a top salary, but it is a good salary. And once they have it, they can choose where they want to do their research, in which university, in which research center, where. So the money goes with the person. They have now 250 people there. I know this Polish guy, but I'm pretty sure there are 3 or 4 or 5 Polish guys. So this was done by one piece of Spain beyond the legal Spanish system. And in fact, the Spanish government said, well, you have done something very good. But they somehow did not have the courage to do it for the whole of Spain, for whatever reason. But what I want to say is that even countries who have more difficulties than the rich countries and, and so on and so forth, there are means to do things. Just look around what other places do, and there are good examples. And I'm pretty sure you could set up something like this.
Okay, thank you for the answers and comments. There is time for 2 more questions, but I would like to ask okay, here and here. Maybe first there and then here.
I have a short question to Professor Banyś. I am from Kielce University of Technology. My name is Bartosik. Professor Banyś, do you think is it advantage or disadvantage if technical university is performing studies also in economics and management, which are usually related to technical aspects? I am asking this question because from some time in our society we hear that there is intention to cancel economics and management in the technical universities.
Okay, thank you. And here.
Stanisław Kistryn, Jagiellonian University Vice Rector for Research. If my question is last, I would like to seek your, let's say, perspective. We are now in the system governed by some rigid or super-regulated rules. We are passing, or hopefully passing, to this autonomous system. What is your opinion about the time scale? About transition time? Well, for instance, structuring, we have now faculties or equivalent structures, and we want something, well, which is more flexible. How do you see the time scale until we have really system which is, well, working and brings fruits for what we are changing?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think first question was for Professor Banyś, so maybe it's a good thing to start from it.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't have the time to expand more on these 3 points, but the second point concerned the kind of diversity inside universities, internal diversity. And from this point of view, this internal diversity is very welcome. It's the question of this federation of universities, and I'm very keen to mention it because I think that this federation of universities, as in France, could be a good thing because it's an agglomeration of different institutions of different missions. From this point of view, the internal structure of an institution like your university has to be shaped by your senate and your rector according to the goals you have established. And from this point of view, if you have economy and management that are related to technical studies, it's okay. I will repeat the question of this flexibility, diversity also inside universities, inside the higher education institutions. Naturally, the question that I put also is the question of borders, of these configurations inside one institutions. And I think that we have Senate and Rector have to answer this question. Maybe sometimes it's not something that we have to do, but it's to us to answer.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would like just to add that the question is related to some special situation in many cities in Poland when you have, for example, technical university and the classic university in the same town. Okay.
Just an example. I mean, from Germany, we also have technical universities and other universities at the same town, in particular in the big cities. However, there is, I think, a big success for training economical engineers at technical universities in Germany, at these technical universities. And this is going very, very well, so that people from economies have an insight into the development of technology and techniques. And this has been started something like 20 years ago, and it's the greatest success these study programs have, and these people are really demanded in industry. Just a comment.
Professor Tarrach, would you like to comment as well on this?
I would like to comment on everything.
Okay.
Very, very shortly. Now about the technical universities getting into management, I think that is very good. I mean, some of my best managers in the University of Luxembourg were engineers by far. So never put barriers between universities. Let them compete. If they do it better, well, then they do it better. If they do it worse, well, they will slowly disappear. That training will disappear, and that's the end of it. So no barriers. I mean, this is a complex world. Interdisciplinary is essential. Where the interesting thing happens is precisely between the disciplines, so no barriers. The other thing was about the time scale of change. Well, that's a difficult thing. Changing a system precisely because universities have a certain inertia and so on is never easy. Now, I think, again, that will depend very much on which university. I don't think you have to have the same transition and rhythm of transition for all the universities. And some universities, the leadership and the support of the university to the leadership will allow maybe a radical change very quickly. I remember once talking to the rector of Aarhus. It was 1 week, I don't know if you were around, but Lawrence. And it was 1 week after he had decided to slash all the departments of his university. One night. In one night he sent an email and he said the departments have disappeared. Okay, I don't know if that was successful or not. So I think look at a little bit. The law should be such that the transition, of course, you can't give an infinite amount of time, but you can say, you have between half a year and 3 years to perform the transition. And then each university will adapt to the best it can do. For this, of course, Professor Hippler said it is essential when you choose a rector. I defend always that it's the board of trustees who should play the major role. But that person, of course, has to somehow convince the university, the Senate. Otherwise, that person is not going to do anything. So, that is very clear. And if that is the case, then, of course, changes are quicker. One final remark about something which has been mentioned several times in the context of France, mergers, or also in Germany this happened. Maybe Professor Hippler want to say something about that. Now, you see, mergers of institutions, in the old days there was, for instance, one university in Strasbourg, then there were 3, and now there is 1 again. So, splitting up or merging very often depends on politics. Very often, a new minister wants to do something quick and wants to be remembered for, something. And by the way, the same happens with rectors. They change the structure because they can say, we have done something. Now, mergers have to be well justified. If the merger is only in order to be better situated in one of the ranks, that's the worst thing you can do. Because the day the rankings will be done correctly, and that day approaches because they are being done better and better. They will not use extensive indicators, but they will use intensive indicators. That's to say, they are not going to count citations, they're going to count citations divided by the number of researchers. Now, if you merge 3 institutions and you evaluate the new institution with intensive indicators, then the new one is by definition worse than the best one of the 3 who got merged. So So, don't do that for that reason. You have to have good reasons for merger, and there are good reasons. Might have a good group in material sciences and one university, and then another good group in a research institute in material sciences. You put them together because putting them together, they can use their infrastructures together. They should have good reasons. But don't do it just because, you will be a large thing, because that does not work.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Hippler, you would like to add?
Yeah, just one word in order to look on the timescale for structural changes and changes. Of course, this depends on the challenges, but there's another thing. It depends also in a more simple way. It depends on the carrots which are there, because you need also to have a benefit from doing this, and this kind of benefits could be money, it could be reputation, or it could be both. And in Germany, these kind of changes have been introduced by this initiative of excellence. And of course, with this, there was a challenge, and of course, there were carrots. And these kind of things, I think, have to go together to make it quicker. And otherwise, if it's just depending on the internal inertia, universities have a very, very high amount of inertia. And they will not move and change direction easily. So you can only do this by having control over the steering, and this is by challenge and also by carrots or money.
Okay.
Just a case of France. It took some 15 years to have an equivalent of excellence initiative, and this initiative of Campus France and Programme d'Investissement d'Avenir. In fact, it was started about 2002, after 2008, and now we have, since 3 years, this initiative of Projet d'Investissement d'Avenir. Then everything took time.
Yeah. Okay, I would like to summarize that maybe in addition to all those very specific comments on different issues, it seems that the more freedom and more autonomy means also more work for the universities to think about their mission, their strategy, and how are they going to use the freedom that is being created. I would say that from your comments and from the discussion, I can draw the conclusion that learn from successes, but also from failures, think big and be open-minded, see the role for yourself and for your own activities. And I have had an impression that actually everyone has an appetite for some experiments, or at least some experimental clause in the Act on Higher Education. And to arrive at the goal, I mean, to arrive at the new situation, we would like to do some efforts, and the good leadership can help with doing it swiftly and efficiently. I would like to thanks very much to our members of the panel for their comments, to the audience for the interesting comments and questions, and to all of you for this interesting and inspiring discussion. Thank you very much.